Today we're going to talk about indoor air quality and the facility manager and why it's so important, so critical to provide a good and effective maintenance program. We're going to talk about proactive facilities inspections and samplings, believe it or not. Air handler systems just like this here, ductwork, diffusers, air conditioning systems, even down to the water systems such as cooling towers, all have regular routine sampling in regards to any type of bacteria or spores or molds. Okay? And again, it's part of the indoor air quality program. Okay? It's required by EPA and also OSHA. Avoidance procedures. How do you avoid indoor air quality problems? Has anybody ever heard of that, indoor air quality? The sick building syndrome. I want to get into some of those, right? Anybody believe it's real? What do you think? Okay. You know, some of these systems, when we get into the controls, a room such as this, if it was a large auditorium, it would actually be tied into an energy management program to where, depending on the O2 levels, they would adjust the outside air dampers up at the air handler up on the roof. So if you get up a certain level, it brings in fresh air, keeps everybody awake, right, and alert, okay, depending on who, of course, the lecturer is or the movie or whatever the case is, okay. All ready? Okay. Now, indoor air quality, okay. Most consider the outdoor environment as providing significant exposure impact. So outside, oh gosh, all the pollutants are outside. I mean, how can it be dirty in this room? I mean, you look in this room, it's not trash blowing around, right, tumbleweeds going across. But in all honesty, since this air is recycled, literally hundreds of times a day, and it goes through the same filters, through the same ductwork, through the same diffusers. So every time you walk in from the outside, depending on what you're tracking, almost like at home, right, when you track in dirt and dust and mud, same thing happens on the interior side. So that's why you have the walk-off mats when we talk about housekeeping. That's why sometimes the carpeting needs to be maintained and extracted on a regular basis. Okay. However, significant exposure impact to the public. Therefore, the logical thought would be to focus on the outdoor environment. Keep the dust down, keep some dust coordinates in check, keep the pollens down, spray olive trees so they don't blossom, right, to minimize the amount of pollens and the allergens and so on. Mulberry trees and so on. Okay, but one item, though, that they haven't considered is the indoor environmental quality of a building. Okay, so in a building, EPA has identified indoor air quality levels are 2 to 5 times worse than the outside air quality. Can you believe that? 2 to 5 times worse. And if you work down in a basement where there's no light, no lighting, right? Imagine the psychological impact that would have on you. But again, maybe the basement was never designed to house people. Maybe the basement was originally a storage facility. We just keep our paper records down there, right? All of a sudden, they ran out of space, and they're looking for space. And some facilities person probably says, hey, you know what? We can move all the boxes out of the basement. We can put cubes in there, put some artificial lighting, maybe put some murals on the wall, some forests, and pack 100 people in there. However, the air conditioning systems were never designed to support that heat load. But not only that, how much dust and other particulates does paper generate, really, sitting in a box, a sealed box? Very minimal. However, you get 100 people in there, right? Now, that's going to affect the ventilation systems, okay? So 2 to 5 times. The World Health Organization considers 30% of the buildings have some sort of IAQ problem. 30% of the buildings that we walk into or work in possibly have some sort of indoor air quality issue. It could be filtration. It could be just distribution. They don't have enough air distribution to keep everybody in the comfort level, right, as far as temperature, okay? And remember this, 90% we spend inside a building. 90% of our lives we spend inside a building of some sort of house, a dorm, an apartment, okay? Even a car. So that doesn't leave much room for the fresh air outside, right? Unless you work for the Forest Service. Then you'd be outside all the time. A little bit different story there, okay? Or a framer, yes, okay? Always breathing in that fresh air, right? Let's talk about sick building syndromes, okay? Situation in which the building occupants experience acute health and comfort effects that appear to be linked to the time spent in the building, but no serious illnesses can really be identified. You know, you've probably heard of folks saying, you know what, every time I walk into this building, I get a headache. Or every time I walk into this lab, or every time I sit in this auditorium, my allergies flare up, right? And I say, this is a sick building. I can feel it. I know it. I can prove it. But sometimes it's so difficult to do that, even though with the sampling. So sometimes it could be what, psychological? Because again, when you get 4 or 5 folks complaining that it's too warm in here, right? The rest of the folks within that group, within that sample, if you will, are going to say, you know what, you're right, I do feel kind of uncomfortable. Even then for them, it may have not been an issue. Okay? So what do you do about it? What do you think? Just ignore it? No, we can't ignore it, right? Okay? So one item is, in my particular facility, we use health services. Anytime an employee does have some sort of symptom, in some cases if it's acute, we always encourage them to report it to health services. That way we can start keeping tracks and records. Okay, and I've got a slide on it that I'll show you on how we do it at our facility. And the reason we do that, we identify, is it a temperature? Because sometimes, again, when trying to save energy, we'll cycle the buildings down. In this case, if it's wintertime, we'll actually We'll raise or lower the temperature in the wintertime, earlier in the afternoon, say around 2 o'clock. If it's the wintertime, right, we're going to raise the temperature, say 2 o'clock. So by the time they leave at 4 o'clock to go home, the temperature in the particular areas may be up to 76, 77 degrees. Well, that's bearable for 30 minutes, maybe an hour at the most. But that's okay because they're going home. In the meantime, from a facility standpoint, I've reaped the benefits of those energy savings. However, it's a balancing act. Because again, I need this feedback and this information. Say, for instance, that these individuals work within a data center. They're really not going to experience too much temperature issues because within a data center, I've got to keep that facility cool on a regular basis. In fact, if anything, they may complain that it's too cold, right? Okay. But say, for instance, that it's a 3-story building and they're up on the 3rd floor. Okay, and they don't have those 2 levels of what I would consider insulation. Okay. And for these individuals, say they work on an average, especially if they have exposure to the west or to the east, say the west windows, okay, for most of the afternoon, okay, there could be temperature issues, okay, in regards to that. So those reports are extremely helpful for facilities. Those things I can regularly and monitor on an energy management program. Set it into software, identify the temperatures, and make the adjustments remotely, even on a palm top. Okay, I can do that as well. Okay. Now, the time spent in the building is the other item as well, such as if I have a cafeteria. Sometimes certain food odors, okay, and I'm going to say sometimes the food and sometimes, if you got a fryer, sometimes the greases and so on, okay, we'll get individuals' allergies, okay, going within a facility. So that's why ventilation systems are extremely important that they're maintained on a regular basis, okay. Anybody know what a grease trap is? Anybody? Grease trap, right? Okay, those we put in a plumbing infrastructure within a restaurant or a cafe, right? And what it does is, what does it do? It separates the grease from the water, right? Did you ever smell one of those being emptied?
You gotta put a gasket in the top of the manhole cover.
It's not the most pleasurable smell. Trust me. I won't explain it. It just doesn't smell very good, right? So typically, those particular ones on the cycle will have a lot of the articles like Baker Commodity. They'll actually come to the facility like 2 in the morning, and they'll pump those out. So nobody but the security officers obviously will smell, the grease trap smells. Okay. Other items as well would be abatement. Okay. Some of you will probably get involved in some abatement, either being maybe asbestos or different types of molds. Again, perception is everything. So those you probably need to schedule off hours on the weekends. Keep that, not only the perception, but also what the hazard risks down to bare minimum. Now on top of that, they have negative air pressure machines, right, to cycle, filter the air, as well as to make sure there's no contaminants that escape that particular parameter. If it's walled off, if it has plastic, and so on. Okay, that's that one room that you walk by. I think you mentioned over at the Hayden facility. Yeah. So they've done the abatement. They did it over the weekend. And it was a big, long, drawn-out. That took a lot of planning. But they're completed. Okay. But, when those materials were installed, though, say 40 years ago, there was no knowledge that that was going to be a hazard in, 2013. Well, guess what? Now we go in for renovation, and guess what's there? It's considered a hazardous waste. Okay. Now, building-related illnesses, or BRI, Conditions used to describe illnesses caused by exposure to environmental agents in a building's air that cause identifiable symptoms of a diagnosable illness. So sometimes they could be allergens. Okay? It could be molds and spores. You know, not everyone's the same. Yep, and not everyone's the same. You know, the glues, right? The adhering agents, the carpet backing in some cases, the paint on the walls would be another one. Okay, the ceiling. Sometimes you may get the projectors. Some of the smells coming off of the light bulbs that are going to bother people. What other type of items? Has anything ever bothered you in a building? And I don't want to hear about the student next to you or anything like that.
Well, the old fluorescents used to, they cycle on and off, so a lot of people are.
Okay, that, the glare, the flickering, okay, has been known to bother people. Yeah, and you can notice that. Some may not. They kind of steer past that, right? Okay. But all these are what when considered items that what are going to prevent individuals from performing at their optimum. Do you remember that pie chart on the cost of a building, the total life cycle cost of the building? It was the occupants. Remember that, 92%? So if you consider that you get 5 or 6% that aren't as productive on a year-round basis, that equates to quite a significant amount of money in regards to labor. Okay. So in some cases here, exposures can be caused by excessive levels of carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. Okay, I don't have enough fresh air being pumped into the room. I don't have enough ventilation. Buildings of the 70s are pretty well airtight. That was to contain hot air in and cool air in. Minimize that going out. Fast forward into the late 90s, especially into the 2000s and into now, where some of the standards require operable windows and fresh air and O2 monitors. Okay, toxic substances such as asbestos and radon, again, common byproducts of a building, okay, part of the construction process. Paints. That's why I personally believe in LEED, because of all the initiatives that they've introduced into the construction industry and the maintenance with LEED, existing building operations and maintenance, on painting with low VOC or non-VOC paints. So you can paint a wall without affecting everyone. But it's still that perception, isn't it? Because an individual can smell something even though it's an odorless paint. But again, it's going to be the perception in regards to that tile. When you come in and you buff a aisleway, such as in a Fry's or an Albertsons or even a large facility, and they're using a propane buffer, perfectly legal. They have their filtration systems right on the exhaust. But again, for some individuals, it's just enough to bother them. Okay, and of course, the last one: bacteria, viruses, and fungi. Okay, and mycotoxins that fungi produce. So those are in the air. Can you see those floating around? It's going to be pretty tough, right? You know, I watched this show on the cable channel, and it's scary stuff. They did microscopic. You know, these microscopes that go to like 1,000,000x, right? And you think of all the things that are on the table and on us, it's kind of scary. You know, you stay up at night with your eyes open. So I am not going to sleep. But it's true. But our bodies have been built, immunities, right, that minimize these. Okay? And I won't go through all the gory details. For me, though, it kind of scared me. It's kind of like, my gosh, no matter what you do, they're there. Okay? It's just part of being a person, right? So in this particular one here, the bacteria and viruses, say for instance, if classrooms are notorious for this in school systems, okay? Because again, you might get a bunch of kids, especially if they're 6th graders. 7th graders are probably the worst, right? And they're in a room for how long? 6, 7 hours straight. God bless those teachers, because they got to put up with that. But then they get immune too. Okay, I don't think teachers ever get sick. Their immune systems are totally 100. My wife taught for 30 years. Never sick until she retired. Now she's always sick, right? Okay. And then thermal comfort. This is the typical diagram. Okay. So again, like anything else, this is an underfloor plenum. And again, this would be considered your drop ceiling. But again, what you want to do is cycle the air. And per ASHRAE, there's a requirement. Have you studied anything to do with mechanical design and air changes and so on? Okay. And those are what? Those are code requirements. And the reason they do that to ensure that you do get a cycle of air. In fact, I just felt the diffusers just come on. I felt the cool air coming on. Okay. But again, part of the maintenance on this particular one here, those regular inspections of ductwork, regular replacements of filtration systems, pre and final filters. So when we go through our tour into central plants, typically central plants are not conditioned. So take a look between the old one and the new one. Okay? Look at the new one and see if it's conditioned and has filtered air, where the technicians and mechanics and electricians actually work in a conditioned central plant that has a filtration system. And then when we go to the old one, take a look at that one and see if that's conditioned. Okay? And if it has filtration systems. Again, they're what? Places where we work, even though they are facilities folks. Okay? Now, acceptable indoor air quality at a point at which 80% of the occupants do not express dissatisfaction. Okay? It is difficult to make everyone comfortable. So even though the ASHRAE has guidelines, say it's 71 to say 75, 76 degrees range, right? Not everyone's going to be comfortable no matter what temperature you give them. It just depends, right, on their individual bodies or DNAs, okay? Case in point, if you went down to the resorts and you looked at the pools, who do you think's swimming in the pools right now? Where do they come from? They don't come from Arizona, right? But for some folks, say they're from Minnesota, from New York, okay, North Dakota, Montana, right? For them, the water temperatures are very comfortable at a certain degree. For Arizonans, we don't get into pool till, well, it's 75 degrees, maybe 80, right? It's like bathtub water. It's like, it's too cold, I'm not going in, right? But it's the middle of July. Well, wait till it warms up a little bit. It's just we've been so acclimated, right? Okay, how about temperature? For Arizonans, it gets below 70, what do we break out? Sweatshirts, right? It's kind of chilly. It's like, it's only 69 degrees. Yeah, but it's below 70 degrees. So you turn on the heater in the car, right? Okay. And, you know, the same thing with the temperature, right? In some cases, it could be 80, 85, 90, and you're driving around with the windows down. I'm used to the heat. I won't turn on the air conditioner until it gets maybe 95 or maybe 96 or something, right? But folks from back east, they got the air on right now. Because today, what was it today? 70s, right? Okay. So for some of these individuals, it might be too cool. But again, getting back to the point, no matter what temperature you set, you're not going to please. So 80% is what you're shooting for. So how do you get this information? Just go around and ask people? Survey, absolutely. You also identify it in service or trouble calls. How many folks are calling in? Out of the 10 top lists that facilities organizations receive, complaints is hot and cold calls. Biggest number. Okay, so 80% is what we're shooting for. Note that somewhere. Put that down on your book somewhere. Okay, that might show up somewhere. 80%. 80%. Okay. All right. Now, indoor pollutants. Okay. New building interiors. How can new building interiors have pollutants? I mean, it's brand new. I just got it from Home Depot. Right? How could that have pollutants? Odors associated with the materials that they were constructed, right? Has anybody heard of gassing, off-gassing a building, right? To where you say we finished this classroom and we run the outside air at 100%, right?
I've not heard it called that.
Okay. So we purge it. So we're going to purge this room, say, for for about 72 hours, maybe for 3 days. What I want to do is pull all the toxins that I can out, and every dust particles left behind, maybe by the construction workers and so on, up through the filtration system. So when we sit down in it, basically the only smell we should really get, right, is for the actual classroom. Now, items like the vinyl on the chairs, you know, your adhesives on the tables, even some of the detergents that the custodians clean this off or what they vacuum it up with, you still smell those, but those are tolerable. Okay. Anybody remember the pine sol smell? Remember that? Yeah, simple green. My mom used to clean with pine sol. It wasn't clean if it didn't smell like pine sol. Yeah. And then the Febreze. My son loves Febreze, and it's like, no, son. You got to wash your shirt once in a while. Just don't spray it with Febreze. Oh, 16-year-olds, I tell you. Okay. But again, you know, one of the case in points in this particular one is that whatever the odor is going to bother one of the occupants or a few of the occupants. Okay. Detergents with another one we talked about. Paints, pesticides. Now, lead, there's, believe it or not, green pesticides. They're natural. Okay? Orange peels would be one. Okay? Somewhere here in this room, you've got a return air duct that goes back up to the air handler. Okay? And I'm going to show you one of those examples here in a bit. And how they do it is they continue this cycle. So they don't use hot and cool. It's 100% outside air. Okay, and what they want to do is dislodge or pull as much of the particulates that they can to the filter systems. This means that I'm going to have a PM, say within the first 24 hours, where I pull those filters out, put fresh ones in, and I come back another 24 hours and pull those out and replace them again as well. Okay, drywall. Has anybody ever worked with drywall? Where does that powder get to?
Everywhere.
Isn't it? I mean, has anybody ever done a home improvement project with drywall? Right? Oh my gosh. You sand it down, right? You close the door, right? So you're in this, maybe it's the kid's bedroom. Maybe you're retexturing the walls or something. Maybe there's little holes that you want to, right? You close their door. You start sanding away, right? You should probably wear a mask, right? But typically, do we? Anna, what do you think? We never do. Why? Because we're men. We don't have to wear masks. We got filtration systems in our noses, right? Okay? So you start sanding this, and you're looking around, says, yeah, this looks pretty good. And you set back, right? And you look around, and you sand it again. And then you look at the floor, and there's some little dust particles starting to build, right? So the more you sand, the bigger those dust particles are, right? But then for you, I mean, you're white, flaking this stuff, powder's flying all over the place. Your face is white. Your hair's white, right? And you open the door, and you look out in the hallway. What do you think you're going to see in the hallway? Dust. What do you think you're going to see in the living room? What do you think you're going to see in the kitchen? And what do you think your wife is going to say? Big time. Because that little dust was what? Picked up by your air conditioning system. Because again, you closed the air, so you built positive pressure in this bedroom. So where's the air going to go? Anywhere it can, right? So you come out, right? And I'm going to shake off inside the bedroom because I don't want to get dust all over the living room, right? But you can actually see it. And over time, what's that? It's going to affect what? Everyone else that comes into the house. Trust me, I've been there. I've done that. It's like, why? It's like, why do you do that for? So you don't ever really think about it. But say I'm working in a building that has maybe 400 occupants. Now I need to take those precautions so that doesn't happen. Okay. How about people? How can they affect? Dandruff. Okie dokie. Okay, dandruff. Don't sit by them over there, okay? Perfumes.
Sure.
Some cases they could be what? They can kind of violate another person's airspace, right? You also got shampoos. Clothing, depending on what they use, the downy or a different type of fabric softener, right? Deodorants, okay? The colognes. Now, men's colognes and women's colognes. Is there a difference between the two?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Since we've been smelling this drywall for all these years, that we have no smelling cells anymore, right? So when we put cologne on, what do you think? A little bit extra heavy? I mean, it's not one of those things where you put it on one little squirt and you kind of, that's enough, right? For us, I still can't smell it, right? So you keep, now I can smell it now. But you know what? You put half the bottle on. So you walk into the grocery store and it's like people are moving away from you. It's like there is something wrong with this individual, right? Okay? But think if you had to sit by them for, say, 6-7 hours a day. How do you tell them? Very carefully, right? Okay? It's like, oh, today's library day. Or, I got to go work maybe in the server room. I got to work outside on the roof today. Darn it. How about it's 102 degrees, but I'm not going to sit and smell you all day long, right? People, odors, and they happen. It's just natural. It's us. We are people, right? But again, these can contribute to indoor. So here's a typical air conditioning system. This is probably a supply air here, and you probably have the returns that come over the backside of this unit here. Okay, typically, they're on rooftop mounted units. You see your walking pads here. Some of your piping for probably your hot and cold water.